Feud.
Who are you to tell me what to do with my own body? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade, sharp, cold, and utterly unexpected. My fiancée, Caroline, had just snapped,
Internet.
her voice cutting through the warmth of my parents' dining room. I was just joking about future kids, thinking it was a cute, normal part of our future. 3 weeks later, I delivered my final answer. Grab your popcorn, folks.
This stories is a wild ride.
I am Brian, 29 years old, and I am here to tell you how 3 years of my life went up in smoke in a single night. I met Caroline for Ephrus's housewarming party 3 years ago.
Vent.
We instantly bonded over our mutual hatred for small talk and those pretentious, overpriced appetizers. For the next 3 years, we were that couple, the ones people pointed at.
The ones who were proof that love wasn't just a fairy tale.
We were on the same page about everything. Career goals, where to live, and yes, even children. We talked about having 2 kids,
Fing Fang.
likely starting in our early 30s when we had better savings and more stability. But, looking back, there were strange moments regarding the topic of children. If a friend announced a pregnancy, Caroline would offer a tight,
Few smile.
then immediately go silent. Whenever I tried to get specific about timelines, she would pivot the conversation back to how we had plenty of time. I interpreted it as being practical and focused.
Dead wrong.
We even had a running joke about naming our future son after my dad's childhood golden retriever, Chester. She would pretend to be horrified, and I would pretend to be stubborn.
You would
Argue over it at breakfast, like it was a genuine disagreement. Both of us stifling laughter. It was our thing, a small, beautiful shorthand for our life together.
Yusham.
Sunday mornings were reserved for a diner near our place, where the waitress knew our order before we even sat down. Eggs over easy for me, avocado toast for her, and bottomless coffee. Thursday nights were for movies, alternating who got to pick with strict veto power against puppets or gore. We shared a color-coded calendar that she designed, and I had finally learned to navigate. We spoke in a language only we understood.
From years of studying each other's rhythms and moods.
8 months ago, I finally proposed. I had been saving for that ring for an entire year, taking extra shifts at the distribution center, where I worked as an operations supervisor. I pulled 14-hour days during peak season, working Saturdays while my friends were at barbecues.
Yeah.
I told Caroline I was helping a friend move or catching up on paperwork, and she never doubted me. She trusted me, and I trusted her with my life.
Finken.
The ring was an $8,000 Investmenta round-cut diamond on a platinum band. I wanted her to look at it 50 years from now and feel that same magic. I proposed at Martin Ellis.
Cozy little spot where we had our third date.
Sal, the owner, had watched us grow together for years, and he actually teared up when I asked if I could pop the question there. Caroline cried. Sal brought out free tiramisu,
Fict.
and everything felt perfectly, undeniably certain. Her parents were ecstatic, her mom practically shrieking with joy over the phone. My parents were just as thrilled when we drove over the next morning to tell them in person. We started planning immediately, fueled by the excitement of a shared future. We were a dream team. Spreadsheets, budgets, divided responsibilities. By the time the dinner at my parents' house rolled around,
We had put down $12,000 in deposits.
we booked a beautiful venue for next Octobera converted barn outside the city. Catering was locked in, the photographer was confirmed, and the DJ was a friend's connection.
Thing.
Everything was in my name because my credit score was higher, but we didn't keep score. We were partners. We had lived in my two-bedroom apartment for 2 years, where she paid her share via Venmo every single month without fail.
Fee.
We blended our lives, shared our accounts, and built a foundation I thought was made of stone. I never had a reason to doubt her commitment. The dinner at my parents' house was intended to be a formal celebration.
Frizz.
My mom had been dying to use her good china and cook her famous pot roast for months. My parents, married for 34 years, really respected Caroline. My dad loved that she could actually listen and hold a conversation, remembering details about his woodworking long after they were discussed. Caroline seemed fine with the plan, though a bit distracted in the days leading up to it. I blamed the stress of her high-pressure account manager job.
Full us.
Her sister, Bailey, had been staying with us for a week. Bailey was a handful. She lived in Ostisman and hosted a podcast called Unshackled Woman that pushed a very specific, rather aggressive worldview. We sat down.
Read.
The roast was perfect, and the mood was light until my mom mentioned the future grandkids. She wasn't being pushy. She was just being a grand mothertobe. I made a joke, something about,
You.
well, see if we can get a miniature Chester running around in a few years. That was when it happened. The air left the room. Caroline slammed her fork down, her face contorting into something I didn't recognize.
From who are you to decide what I do with my body?
She snapped, her voice echoing off the walls. My parents froze their forks halfway to their mouths. I just meant I started confused. You don't get to decide that, she hissed.
Thing.
Her eyes darting to Bailey, who was smirking from across the table. I don't think I'm ever going to have kids, Brian, and frankly, I'm tired of you pretending otherwise. I sat there, stunned, while Bailey leaned back,
Beamingly enjoying the wreckage.
We talked about this, Caroline, I said softly, trying to de-escalate. No, you talked about it, she corrected me, her voice cold. I just didn't want to ruin your little fantasy.
Parents were silent, mortified.
I realized then that she hadn't just been stressed by work, she had been acting a part. As the night progressed, it became clear this wasn't about the kids.
Speak.
It was about a lifestyle she no longer wanted, influenced heavily by her sister's rhetoric. 3 weeks later, I sat her down. You're right, I said, handing her a folder. She looked at me, confused.
Fremsen.
I can't decide what you do with your body, and you certainly can't decide to live a life you clearly resent with me. I had canceled every contract, pulled my deposits, and contacted the venue. What is this? She whispered,
Voice.
trembling for the first time. It's the end of our lease, the cancellation of the wedding, and the return of your ring, I replied, standing up. You think you're so unshackled? I asked, looking her dead in the eye.
Free then. But you won't be doing it here.
The look on her face, when she realized I wasn't pleading, but finalizing was the final emotional pivot. She tried to scramble back,
Fuse it.
talking about how she was just influenced and stressed, but the mask was off. I stayed calm, collected and firm. I walked away from the engagement, the wedding, and the woman I thought I knew. Justice felt like cold.
Clear air. In my lungs.
I didn't lose 3 years. I gained a lifetime of clarity. And as I closed the door on our apartment that last time, I didn't feel broken. I felt exactly like a man who had just dodged a bullet.
Sometimes the truth hurts.
But it is the only thing that sets you truly free. The past week had been a slow-motion car crash, though I was too blind to see the wreckage until the very end. My sister-in-law, Bailey,
Big.
was what my father used to call a piece of work. She lived in Austin, broadcasting a podcast titled Unshackled Woman to 40,000 followers, who lived for her brand of radical, unfiltered cynicism. Her doctrine was simple.
Fuse.
Marriage was a prison for the soul, and motherhood was merely a government-sanctioned career killer. To Bailey, a relationship was only valuable if it acted as a stepping stone for her own ego.
To be discarded.
The second, it stopped feeling convenient. I never hated Bailey, but being around her felt like running a marathon in combat boots. Every time we sat down to eat,
Vent.
having dinner, she was workshopping content for her next episode. 2 years ago, when we first met, she tried to record me without consent, hoping to capture some toxic patriarchal reaction to her setting boundaries.
He pulled her.
I told her no, but she posted about me anyway, painting me as a textbook narcissist to keep her followers engaged. That should have been my first red flag. But I was too busy trying to keep the peace. The week before our big family dinner, Bailey crashed on our couch, turning our home into a production studio. I'd come home from work to find her and my fiancée, Caroline, huddled in whispers, the air thick with secrets that evaporated. The moment I entered the room, Bailey would be clutching her phone, recording snippets of our lives, often muttering, "This is exactly what I mean," before falling silent when she saw me.
Figsy gapped.
I brushed it off as sisterly bonding, even when she gave me that chilling, lingering look on her way out the door, telling me to take care of myself like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. The night of the dinner,
My parents' house. A 45-minute trek through the suburbs.
walking into that home felt like stepping back into my childhood, the scent of pot roast, the lemon polish on the table,
Patient.
and the books still shelved exactly where I left them in middle school. For the first 90 minutes, the facade of a perfect family dinner held strong. We laughed. My dad cracked jokes about my abysmal Little League career,
Thanked.
and Caroline actually seemed to be enjoying herself. Then, the trap sprung. My mother, with nothing but warmth and curiosity, asked about the future, specifically about the possibility of grandchildren.
Thank.
It wasn't a demand, it was the soft, hopeful dreaming of a woman who just wanted to love a new generation. I made a lighthearted, offhand comment about how one day we'd need a bigger house.
Filler sentence. I'd used a dozen times before.
The atmosphere in the room shifted so violently, I felt the air pressure drop. Caroline's smile didn't just fade, it vanished, replaced by an icy, robotic expression.
Method.
She set her down with a metallic clink that sounded like a gunshot in the silence of the dining room. I never planned on being a mother, she said, her voice completely devoid of the warmth she'd been faking for the last hour.
Eugen.
And I'd really appreciate it if you all stopped acting like that's part of my agenda. My mother froze, her hands hovering over her plate, eyes wide with confusion and hurt. My father slowly laid his fork down,
Faced.
his face hardening. As he looked at this woman he thought he knew, I looked at Caroline, trying to bridge the gap between the woman I loved and the stranger currently dismantling my family's peace. Caroline, I said softly.
Think you're overreacting. We were just talking.
She turned to me, her eyes burning with a sudden sharp malice. We never agreed on that, Brian, she snapped. You just assumed like everyone else. My body,
Fiend at.
my life, am not an incubator for your family's expectations. It was as if Shed slapped me across the face in front of the people who raised me. She wasn't talking to me. She was performing for an audience only she could see.
Reciting the scripts.
Shed spent all week absorbing from Bailey. Caroline, I started again, my voice shaking with disbelief. You told me you wanted children. You told me we were building a future together. She leaned in,
Second.
her voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the room like a razor. I said what I had to say to make you stop pushing. That's what women do when they're trapped by their partners. We perform. The room went deathly quiet.
Moment.
The entire foundation of our 3-year relationship turned to dust. I looked at her,
East.
realizing she hadn't just been lying to my parents, been living a lie with me to keep her autonomy while I was footing the bills for a life she clearly despised. I slowly stood up, placing my napkin on the table.
Think we should go.
I said, my voice strangely steady, as if I'd already detached myself from the scene. I thanked my parents for the dinner, ignoring the tears welling up in my mother's eyes. I walked to the door.
First time. I didn't care if Caroline followed me.
She trailed behind, silent, finally realizing the performance had reached its final act. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage behind. For the first time in years, the only unshackled person in this situation was me. As I started the car, the silence between us wasn't just heavy, it was the sound of a life finally being reclaimed. She looked at me,
Thing.
waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to try to fix it. But I just put the car in gear. The nightmare was over, and the truth, no matter how painful, had finally set us both free.
Pheasant.
This is the story of how a single dinner party destroyed 3 years of trust, and how I discovered the invisible hand behind my broken engagement. The silence in the car was heavy enough to choke on.
Things.
Caroline sat with her arms tightly folded, staring out the window, vibrating with a defensive energy that made my skin crawl. We had just walked out of my parents' house after she had detonated a bomb in their dining room.
Fingal a match.
Not a single apology, not a shred of acknowledgement that she had just shattered the evening. When we pulled into the driveway, she marched straight to the bathroom and locked the door behind her.
Fend.
I heard the water start to run. It was a long shower, the kind you take when you're mentally sharpening your blade for a battle you plan to win. About 45 minutes later,
View that.
she walked out and sat in the chair directly across from me. You are not even going to say a word. What exactly is there left for me to say? We spent the next hour running in circles, a dizzying loop of blame and deflection.
Thing singy.
She insisted that I had put her on the spot, forcing her to speak her truth. I reminded her that she had ambushed my parents at their own table with a cold, calculated announcement that she never intended to be a mother.
Blamed. She was finally being authentic.
I told her she had been lying to me about a fundamental life goal for 3 years. I asked her, point blank, what she actually wanted from this relationship.
Stripping away all the noise.
Was it what she truly wanted, or was it just what her sister Bailey told her she should want? Suddenly, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it,
Felt it.
and her entire expression shifted from cold anger to a strange, distant clarity. I just want a partner who respects my choices instead of interrogating them like a detective.
Fest. Fat.
And I want a partner who doesn't conceal major life decisions until we are mere months away from a wedding. It seems we both have plenty to think about. She took the couch that night, leaving me to stare at the ceiling.
Running calculations I desperately didn't want to solve.
The next morning, the house felt like a crime scene where the body had been moved, but the blood was still fresh on the floor. Caroline acted as if nothing had happened,
She made coffee.
scrolled through her feed, and asked me what I wanted for dinner, as if we weren't standing on the edge of a cliff. I played along for 12 hours, going to work and coming home.
You. Moving around her like a polite stranger.
On the third day, I finally called James. He was my oldest friend, the guy I called when the world felt too loud and my own judgment felt compromised.
Coffee shop near his office. And I spilled everything.
I told him about the dinner, the outburst, and the cold way she looked at me, as if my expectations were a personal insult. James listened, his eyes steady.
Finally ran out of words.
He took a slow, thoughtful sip of his coffee and looked at me. That is rough, man, but what does your gut tell you?
Held him felt like someone had swapped my life out for a copy while I wasn't looking.
James nodded, his gaze sharpening. Her sister Bailey has been in town for a week, right?
He wondered.
Realized then that the timing wasn't a coincidence. Everything had shifted the moment that woman entered our home. James leaned in, his voice dropping, not saying it's definitely the sister.
Things. But I've heard that podcast of hers.
She could convince a fish to resent the water it swims in. Just watch the patterns and keep your eyes open. I took his advice to heart. Over the next few days,
Eased.
I stopped being a participant and started being an observer. I noticed the midnight phone calls she took in the bathroom with the fan running to mask the sound.
Fit.
I watched her minimize her screens. The exact second I walked into the room, her vocabulary had changed, becoming filled with buzzwords like emotional labor, radical self-prioritization, and performative commitment.
You as if she was reciting a script she hadn't written.
And then I realized where the script came from. Bailey's podcast had become the soundtrack of our Maria G. Toby. It was playing in the car, in the kitchen.
Through her headphones.
At night,
I started listening. Really listening.
one episode was a scathing attack on the myth of the good partner, arguing that women were being groomed to accept the bare minimum.
Fable.
Is just a starting point, not a virtue, the voice on the recording preached. If the best thing you can say about your man is that he is reliable, you are settling. The next morning,
Thinged.
Caroline looked at me and told me she felt we had fallen into a rut. I had always thought our routines were the foundation of a stable, happy life. Apparently, in Bailey's world, they were evidence of stagnation.
Fant.
The final straw came when I heard an episode featuring a woman who had abandoned her fiancé weeks before the wedding. She described him as a placeholder, a rental car. She was returning, now that she had found a better model.
You.
Caroline was listening to this in the kitchen, nodding, while I stood in the doorway, realizing that I wasn't her partner anymore. I was just the furniture she was planning to move out before the new life began. The emotional switch flipped in me. and for the first time, the pain was replaced by a sharp, cold clarity. She wanted a new life, and it was time I stopped playing the part of the convenient stableman who didn't exist.
Vint.
I walked into the kitchen, turned off the speaker, and looked her in the eyes. I think I'm done with the podcast, Caroline, and I think I'm done with the relationship too. She looked shocked,
Thing.
probably because she expected me to keep trying to prove my worth to her. She didn't know that when you stop centering your life around someone who doesn't want you there, the world suddenly opens up again.
Fusions.
I walked out of the house that morning, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. The justice wasn't in winning the argument. The justice was in realizing I didn't need to be part of her performance anymore.
Felon.
The silence in our apartment used to be a comfort, a shared space where Caroline and I could exist without the need for constant chatter. But lately, the silence felt heavy,
Feet.
layered with things left unsaid, and secrets being carefully constructed in the shadows. It started with a subtle shift in her language,
YouTube.
a way of describing our life that felt like she was narrating a documentary about a couple she barely knew. She began speaking about me to her friends as if I were a reliable piece of furniture,
Fee.
something that served a purpose but could be discarded when the decor needed updating. He's so predictable. I overheard her saying to Bailey over the phone,
Fingshy.
her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that stung more than a direct insult. I was in the kitchen, carefully measuring out ingredients for a dinner I hoped would bridge the growing distance between us.
Funo.
The way she spoke about our stability as if it were a deficiency rather than a foundation made my skin crawl. I just feel like I'm waiting for something more, she whispered. And in that moment,
Pudding.
the man I thought I knew in her eyes vanished entirely. The next evening, Caroline walked through the door and immediately shifted into a state of heightened frustration.
He claimed.
The division of our household responsibilities was fundamentally flawed, despite the fact that I handled the trash, the dishes, and the bulk of the maintenance. It's the invisible work, Brian, she insisted,
Finked.
waving a hand vaguely at the air, as if the concept were a tangible object I was too dim-witted to perceive. When I pushed for clarity, asking her to define exactly what was missing,
Fusion.
she retreated behind the shield of emotional labor, a buzzword she used to shut down any rational conversation. I spent that night staring at our shared digital calendar, searching for the gaps she claimed existed.
Fute.
I found nothing but my own attempts to keep us connected, while her entries were becoming increasingly sparse. But the podcast she listened to incessantly during this period focused on financial autonomy,
You jope.
preaching that joint accounts were chains of oppression. Within 48 hours, she demanded we dismantle the financial life we had built together,
Fat.
insisting on individual Venmo transfers for every single grocery run and utility bill. It was a systematic unraveling, a dismantling of us that felt like a surgical procedure performed without anesthesia.
Finged.
Then came the prenup conversation brought up casually over coffee, as if she were suggesting a new brand of cereal. It's just for protection, she said, her eyes never meeting mine,
Finked.
as if the very act of looking at me might reveal the guilt festering underneath. The engagement ring disappeared from her finger,
Figgy.
replaced by a convenient excuse about skin sensitivity, a ring she had worn proudly for nearly a year without a single complaint. Our physical intimacy evaporated, replaced by the stiff, polite gestures of roommates who were barely tolerating one another. Every time I reached for her hand, she found a reason to move, a chore to perform, a distraction to embrace. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday,
Thing.
the air thick with the humidity of a brewing storm. She was in the living room, deep in conversation with Bailey, making no attempt to hide her words from me as I stood in the kitchen doorway.
Thing.
I need to manage the logistics before I make any moves, she said, her tone cold and analytical. He thinks we're fine, which makes the whole process so much easier here, she added, followed by a light, chilling laugh. I stood there,
Feud.
paralyzed, watching the pasta water boil over, the heat of the stove, nothing compared to the cold realization washing over me. She wasn't just leaving, she was executing a strategy.
You. A calculated departure that had been in motion for weeks.
I decided, then and there, that I would no longer be a pawn in her game of silent exits. The first piece of the puzzle fell into place by sheer,
Figged.
cruel coincidence a week later. I was working remotely when Caroline asked me to retrieve her iPad from the nightstand so she could look up a recipe. As I picked it up,
Fig screen.
the screen ignited with a text notification from Bailey that stopped my heart in its tracks. Did you reschedule the follow-up? The message read, 6 weeks post-procedure is standard for the check-in. I stood there,
Bet.
the device burning my palm. The words repeating in my mind until they lost their meaning. Post-procedure, 6 weeks. I handed her the iPad with a steady hand, watching for a flicker of recognition.
Fine.
That she knew I had seen it, she took it, her smile thin and performative. And for the first time, I saw the mask slip just enough to reveal the stranger beneath. I began to calculate.
Figjute.
Tracing back the timeline of our intimacy, the unexplained doctor's appointments, and the sudden shift in her behavior. The second blow came from Rosa, a woman who had been a fixture in our circle since our college days.
Being.
She met me at a cafe, her face a mask of nervous energy, her hands trembling as she reached for her coffee. I don't know how to tell you this, Brian, she began, pushing a screenshot across the wooden table. It was a group chat.
You.
A digital sewer where Caroline's true thoughts were spilled out for her friends to dissect. Brian is great on paper, mate, but unsettling. Caroline had written, the words sharp enough to cut through the noise in my head. Then,
Famousy.
there was the mention of the appointment, the confirmation that the pregnancy scare had been real, and that I had been excluded from the reality of it. She's handling it, Bailey had replied,
You.
turning my wife's medical crisis into a strategic plot point. Rosa looked at me with eyes full of pity, asking if I had known. But I couldn't speak, I only shook my head.
Betrayal finally settling into my bones.
Like a terminal diagnosis. The third piece, the final crushing revelation, arrived in the mail that very same evening.
Picked.
An explanation of benefits letter from our insurance provider lay in the tray, addressed to Caroline. Marked with the clinical indifference of bureaucracy. I stared at the envelope, knowing that once I opened it,
Figged.
there would be no going back, no pretending that my marriage was anything other than a house of cards. I slit the paper open, the sound of the blade tearing through the envelope, echoing like a gunshot in the quiet apartment.
Fist.
Inside were the details of a procedure that had happened weeks ago, a medical event that Caroline had navigated in complete secrecy. But it wasn't just the procedure that froze my blood, it was the name of the clinic and the date.
Ingsen.
It coincided with the weekend she had told me she was visiting her sick aunt in the city, the weekend I had stayed behind to paint our bedroom. She had lied about her location, lied about her health,
Thanks.
and lied about the very foundation of our family. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter trembling in my hands, as the timeline of her deception finally became clear.
Warrant.
This wasn't just a woman wanting space. This was a woman who had systematically deleted me from her life while keeping me there to pay the rent and maintain the facade. I felt a strange sense of clarity replace the heartbreak,
Ington.
a cold, hard resolve that began to harden in my chest. She wanted to handle things? She wanted to treat our life like a rental car. Fine. I walked to the closet, pulled out a small locked box,
Frummed.
and placed the letter inside alongside the screenshots from Rosa. I would play the part of the unsuspecting husband for exactly as long as I needed to. I began to document everything, every conversation, every discrepancy.
Fugus. Lie.
The irony was that she was so busy planning her exit that she didn't notice the floor beneath her was already being pulled away. She still came home at night, still complained about the chores,
Victim.
still acted as though she were the victim of an oppressive domesticity. But the power dynamic had shifted, and she was too blinded by her own narcissism to see the target painted on her own back. I started moving my own assets.
Few. Securing my future and ensuring that when the time came.
The only person left with nothing would be the one who tried to leave me with everything lost.
Vote.
She thought she was the one orchestrating the end, but the end game had already been rewritten. The next time she brought up the division of labor, I didn't defend myself. I simply looked at her, smiled, and said, "You're right, Caroline. Let's make some big changes."
The look of genuine surprise on her face
Was almost worth the pain of the last 3 months. She had no idea that the safe option had just become the most dangerous person she had ever underestimated. The trap was set,
the evidence was cataloged.
and I was finally ready to let the truth do what it does best: burn everything to the ground. I watched her walk into the bedroom,
Viewed.
completely unaware that the life she thought she was leaving was already gone. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the narrative would be mine, and for the first time in years, I felt entirely, terrifyingly free.
Following is a dramatic storytelling script.
Designed for a YouTube narrative format. I always thought that a house becomes a home because of the people living inside it. Dot. I was wrong.
Faced.
A home is just a collection of walls and furniture. It's the secrets buried beneath the floorboards that eventually bring the roof crashing down. I sat there staring at a white envelope,
Thinking.
the kind that usually brings boring insurance updates or billing statements. But this one was different. The name on the front was hers, Carolyn. Dot, the provider was a clinic I didn't recognize.
E.
And the line item under service description turned my blood into ice.
Pregnant.
She hadn't just been pregnant, she had ended it without saying a single word to me. I sat on the couch until 2 a.m.
Surrounded by the suffocating silence of our living room.
My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from a cold, hollow realization. I believe in a woman's right to choose, I still do. If she had come to me,
You.
if she had cried in my arms and told me she wasn't ready, I would have held her. We would have navigated that storm together. But she didn't trust me. Instead, she had made the choice in the dark,
Fed you.
with her friend Bailey whispering strategies in her ear, while she looked me in the eye every morning over coffee. She was planning a wedding she called a trap to her friends.
Think she.
While letting me pour my savings into a future she was dismantling behind my back. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. Something inside me simply snapped, and in its place, a crystalline, terrifying clarity took over.
Vent.
I realized I wasn't her partner. I was just a placeholder, safe, reliable option she was settling for until something better appeared. The next morning, I woke up, kissed her forehead,
Vent.
and went to work like nothing had changed. But I was a ghost inhabiting my own life. I spent that week systematically deleting our future. I handled the wedding vendors, one by one.
Like a man clearing a path through a jungle.
The venue coordinator, a woman named Samantha, picked up on the third ring. "I need to cancel the booking for next October," I said, my voice steady. "Oh, am so sorry to hear that."
You replied.
"The engagement is over," I stated. There was a pause, and then the shift in her tone from corporate to human. "I've been there, Brian. It does get better."
Finction.
She helped me recoup $3,000 of the $5,000 deposit. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The caterer, the photographer, the DGI hunted them down like a man on a mission. I lost money, sure.
You.
12,000 in deposits turned into 6,000 back.
Da.
But it was cheap tuition for the lesson I just learned. Throughout all of this, Caroline didn't notice a single thing. She was permanently glued to her screen,
You.
lost in her podcasts and those endless, cryptic text threads with Bailey. We were like two strangers sharing a lease, moving in and out of the same rooms without ever touching. Then, on Friday night,
Phone.
my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hey, this is Bailey."
You.
The woman who had coached my fiancé through a secret abortion and a fake engagement was finally breaking the silence. I knew then that the final act was about to begin. I didn't reply to Bailey. Instead,
Finsting.
I waited until Caroline went to her book club meeting, which I knew was just code for a night out with the girls. I went into our bedroom and opened her laptop. I didn't have to search hard. There, in the browser,
You now were her. Messages.
I read the text between her and Bailey. They weren't just talking about the abortion.
You dead.
They were laughing about how much money they could squeeze out of me for the wedding before she finally dumped me at the altar. "He's such a boring provider," Bailey had typed just 2 days ago.
Hell.
Pay for everything until the very last second. Just keep 'em on the hook. I wasn't just a placeholder. I was the mark. I didn't confront her that night either. I didn't have to. I packed my things quietly.
The engagement.
Ring the $8,000 tuition fee on the kitchen counter. Next to a printed copy of the cancellation notices from the vendors. When she came home that night, the house was silent. She walked into the kitchen, saw the receipts, and saw that the fridge was empty of all my belongings.
Dot!
She called me. She screamed. She wept. She played the victims. She even tried to threaten me with legal action.
I didn't say a word.
I simply sent her a screenshot of the text conversation I had found on her laptop, and then I blocked her number. I moved into a small apartment the next day. I am finally free. Sometimes,
Think.
the weddings that never happen are the luckiest ones of all. It took me 3 years to realize the truth, but it only took 1 week to cut the chains. I am finally sleeping through the night, and for the first time in years,
Fen, the house I live in actually feels like a home.
justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes, it's just the quiet, firm sound of a door locking from the inside, leaving the ghosts of your past exactly where they belong, outside.
You that.
The air in our apartment felt heavy, like the silent countdown before a storm. We were living in the same space, but we were miles apart, just two ghosts haunting the same hallways. On a Friday night,
Buzzed with an unknown number.
"Hey, this is Bailey. Caroline says you've been acting distant lately. I think we should talk. I'm in town this weekend." I stared at the screen.
You.
The silence of the room answered for me. I knew she wouldn't just go away. To people like them, everything is potential content, and content doesn't just knock once. Saturday morning arrived with clear, mocking skies.
Thing.
I made my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. Caroline shuffled into the room around 10:30, her eyes glued to her phone, completely bypassing me. "Bailey is coming over in a bit," she said, her voice hollow.
It's some sister stuff. Do you mind giving us some space for a couple of hours?
I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the bitterness on my tongue. "Actually," I replied, my voice steady.
Need to talk to you about something important.
And honestly, Bailey should probably hear it too. She looked up then, and for a split second, something flickered in the depths of her eyes, a tiny spark of alarm.
Find of. Something are you talking about?
"Sit down, Caroline." She didn't move. "You're starting to scare me, Brian. Sit down." She obeyed, moving slowly, as if the air around her had turned to lead.
Vicky's.
I took a deep breath, grounding myself, keeping my tone perfectly level. I know about the procedure. 6 weeks ago, the color drained from her face, leaving her ghost white.
Ease you.
I saw the notification on your iPad when you asked me to grab it for you, and the insurance paperwork arrived shortly after that. She stared at me, her lips parted, but no sound came out.
You were snooping through my things. Fed firmly.
The statement came to the apartment. I didn't go hunting for it. It was just there. Suddenly, the buzzer rang. Bailey. The timing was almost cinematic. "Let her in," I instructed.
She needs to hear this, too.
Caroline walked to the intercom like she was dragging her feet through deep water. A minute later, Bailey burst through the door, her shoulder bag swinging and her phone already held high,
Camera angle preset.
as if she were documenting a crime scene. "What is going on here?" Bailey demanded, her eyes darting between us. "Caroline, you look like you've seen a ghost. What did he do to you?" "She's perfectly fine."
Interrupted. My voice sharp.
"We are having a serious conversation. You are welcome to stay, but you need to put the phone away." Bailey scoffed. "I have every right to record this. This isn't content."
Util.
I cut her off, pointing to the device in her hand. "If you want to narrate your feelings later, go right ahead, but not in my living room." Bailey hesitated, her ego battling her greed, before she lowered the phone with obvious.
Evidence.
"Fine, but I'm staying. I wouldn't have it any other way." I turned my focus back to Caroline. "Here is the reality of the situation. I have canceled the wedding.
Vendors.
All the vendors have been notified. This apartment is mine, the lease is in my name, and I've already spoken to the landlord. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The joint account has been split.
Half is untouched.
Caroline's face cycled through shock, denial, and pure, unadulterated confusion. Then, the tears started the classic, calculated flood. What? You can't just do this, she sobbed.
We didn't even talk about this. This isn't fair.
We are talking right now, I said. She tried the first angle, the emotional appeal. Baby, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I was just scared.
You would react.
But everything was happening so fast, and Bailey was here, and I just panicked. Stop, I said, holding up a hand. You weren't scared. You made a conscious decision, hid it for 6 weeks.
And kept planning a wedding you never intended to have.
All while telling your friends I was just a safe option you were settling for. She went completely pale. How could you possibly know that? Rosa, I said.
He showed me the group chat.
She told me I deserved to know what my fiancé really thought of me. Caroline's eyes flicked to Bailey for a split second, a desperate look of inquiry. It was as if she were checking the script, looking for the next line to save her. That tiny, involuntary moment told me everything I needed to know about who was truly pulling the strings. Bailey stepped forward, her face shifting into damage control mode.
This is exactly the kind of toxic reaction I warned you about.
Caroline. He's being controlling. He's being punitive. You can't end a marriage engagement just because she made a private medical decision.
Feet.
Not ending it because of the decision, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet apartment. Ending it because of the lies, the secrecy, the 6 weeks of looking me in the eye while hiding something so fundamental. Fact that she's been describing me to her inner circle as a placeholder while I've been building a future she was actively sabotaging. That! Bailey's face twitched. She clearly hadn't expected me to have the receipts.
Shifted to angle 2.
Deflection and minimization. You are overreacting, Brian. This was one mistake, one small secret. Couples get through much worse than this. We can fix our communication. We can go to therapy.
Feet.
With someone who has been calling me a placeholder to her friends for months. No, thank you. Caroline tried angle 3. Bargaining with empty promises. We can work through this. We can do couples therapy.
Visual.
Therapy, even take a break while we figure things out. Whatever. You need, he'll do it. I love you. You don't get to say. You love someone you've been lying to for months, replied coldly.
You had to call it a mistake when you had
A whole support system, helping you maintain the web of lies. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is who you are. She shifted to angle 4, righteous indignation.
The tears stopped as quickly as they had started.
You know what? She spat. Maybe I did settle. Maybe you're exactly as boring and controlling as Bailey said you were.
Ended.
This months ago. Instead of trying to make your pathetic life work. Maybe you should have, I agreed. But you didn't. You stuck around while I paid for every single wedding deposit?
Planned a future you were actively undermining.
That isn't settling, Caroline. That is using someone. The room went deathly quiet. The threats. Her voice hardened,
Begged.
losing all pretense of sweetness. If you do this, I will tell everyone what kind of person you really are. I'll post about it on every platform. I'll make sure the world knows you abandoned me over a private medical decision.
Vid.
I looked at her for a long, steady moment, feeling a strange sense of liberation. Go ahead, I said. Tell whatever story you want. Post whatever you want. I'll tell the truth.
Fuse.
I'll tell them I ended an engagement with someone who lied about fundamental truths while planning a wedding she never intended to keep. People can decide for themselves who the villain is. She had nothing left.
Thin.
The manipulation playbook was officially exhausted. The tears weren't working. The threats had bounced off me like pebbles against a wall. She just sat there, looking smaller and more insignificant than I had ever seen her.
Feeling the weight of the last few months lift off my shoulders.
The ring, I said. Keep it, sell it, I don't care. Consider it severance pay. Severance, she whispered, stunned. Yes, I said.
Full. Walking toward the door.
It's a lot cheaper than a divorce would have been if I had married you and found out all of this 2 years down the road. Consider it a mutual win. I grabbed my jacket and didn't look back.
Fend.
The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in a very long time, the air outside felt clean. Severance.
Phew, that's a
Hell of a lot cheaper than a divorce would have been if S stayed with you and uncovered all this rot 2 years down the line. Consider it a win-win for both of us. I grabbed my jacket from the chair,
frontalite.
the leather cool against my palm. I walked toward the front door without looking back. Yep, when I return, I'd truly appreciate it if you've already started packing your things and making arrangements.
30 days.
I paused with my hand on the doorknob, turning slightly to look at Bailey. By the way, that's a great podcast you've got. Goodbye. It's been really educational.
B.
You should honestly record an entire episode about this specific situation. Call it when unshackling goes wrong. Be the first one to tune in.
Face.
Bailey's face flickered through at least 5 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds: shock, anger, confusion, and finally a creeping realization. Behind her, Caroline remained slumped at the kitchen table,
V.
staring blankly at the empty space in front of her. She looked completely shell-shocked. Her crocodile tears had failed to manipulate me. Her hollow threats had fallen flat. And now,
Ictal.
she was sitting in an apartment she'd soon be forced to vacate, staring down a future that looked nothing like the one she had meticulously planned. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity for her. I just felt finished.
V in bed.
Everything was drained out of me, and for the first time in years, the silence in the room felt clean. Here is what actually happened over the next few weeks.
Finked.
Caroline finally packed her life into cardboard boxes and moved out 19 days later. She crashed at Bailey's apartment in Austin for a few weeks, likely venting and playing the victim to anyone who would listen.
Before finally securing her own place back here in town.
She tried reaching out to me exactly twice. The first time, she claimed she wanted to talk things through and find closure. The second time,
He asked.
if it'd be willing to reconsider our entire relationship. I didn't respond to either attempt. Some doors in life are slammed shut for a reason, and there is no key left to open them. As for Bailey, he actually did make an episode about the ordeal. She titled it When Sisters Choose Themselves. She framed the entire narrative as Caroline's grand awakening, casting her as a woman seeking her independence. And me.
You.
I was painted as the toxic, controlling ex-partner who simply couldn't handle a woman setting boundaries. The episode got about 200 comments within the first 24 hours.
Fashion.
Most of them were women writing long paragraphs about how Caroline had dodged a bullet. A few were guy strangers who clearly understood the subtext saying, I had actually dodged a tactical missile.
Untiled.
Take those odds any day of the week. Guys, we are so incredibly close to hitting that 100,000 subscriber milestone on this channel. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so right now.
Really helps us.
Reach that 100,000 mark and keep this community growing. Thanks for helping make this dream come true, and I'll see you in the next one.